So we can start with some introductions, and hopefully other people are uh, joining and can join okay. So this is our first webinar where we're going to be talking to some of our life influencers about tips for creating their circles and engaging people in their circles. So this is, I'm Paige Jarrow. I am a science communicator and I do social media at LifeOmic. And then we also have Don Brown, the CEO of LifeOmic, on the call to talk about the science of fasting. So we're going to actually start with a discussion on the science of fasting. So I've asked Don to come in and give us 10 to 15 minutes of maybe get a little bit nerdy about intermittent fasting and hopefully answer some of your questions. If you do have questions, just throw them in the chat, but about really getting into the underlying mechanisms of fasting.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll just launch into it. I won't get too nerdy. Just a brief discussion. For me, I went through medical school a long time ago, and it was striking to go through the process of learning about different diseases, and you got the impression that they were all separate. And that they were all a bunch of individual landmines that you could avoid stepping on, and you'd get through life and be relatively healthy. You could avoid Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or heart disease or osteoporosis. And it just really seemed as if each one of these was its own individual disease with no underlying mechanism in common. I went off into the computer industry for many years and kind of forgot about things, but I actually just a few years ago went through a master's program in biotechnology at Johns Hopkins, and I really got reintroduced to some of the molecular underpinnings of disease processes. Back in the 90s, there'd been a lot of excitement because of a discovery starting off in fruit fly and kind of working its way up the evolutionary ladder that kind of counterintuitively starvation, fasting, caloric restriction, was shown to extend the lifespan and the health span of different organisms. And so it set off a frenzy of activity. People were looking for small molecules like resveratrol, the famous red wine molecule, that could potentiate this effect. The focus was around caloric restriction. And so there were lots of tests with organisms that just kept them for years in lightly fed states, and they did very well. There was a famous article published in the New York Times about 2010 that compared two rhesus monkeys, one that had been maintained on an extremely low-calorie diet for its lifetime, and the other on a normal diet, and the differences were striking. As a result, there was even a society of human beings that sprang up centered on caloric restriction. These were people who committed to live on about 1,200 calories a day for the rest of their lives. I remember seeing a video, a documentary about these people, and the results were impressive. People didn't get a lot of the diseases of aging, but they looked like crap. It just didn't look like a very fun way to live, so I kind of mentally wrote it off. But I became excited a little over 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, during the second half of my studies at Johns Hopkins. I came across a paper by Valter Longo. And this paper purported to show that you didn't have to live in a permanent state of caloric restriction, of semi-starvation, but rather what you could do was starve for a shorter period of time, on the order of 24 to 72 hours, and get many of the same benefits as long as you would do that periodically. Longo did this in mice and then did some studies since then in humans, but it sent me off on kind of an odyssey where I discovered all papers by a number of luminaries in the field, like Mark Madsen at Johns Hopkins and many others. And I realized the science behind this was very solid, that unlike a lot of the sort of dietary fads that I had encountered over the course of my lifetime, that, cholesterol's good, cholesterol's bad, eggs are good, that there was something more profound going on with intermittent fasting. And that over the course of the last 20 years, the actual molecular mechanisms have been elucidated to the point that we know now with a great level of granularity exactly what's going on in the fasted state versus the fed state. And I certainly could geek out for the next hour, but I'll just simplify it to say that you can think of it as there being two main signaling pathways into a cell. Cells need signals from the outside telling them whether to just keep on doing what they're doing, or for stem and progenitor cells to kick into high gear and reproduce and multiply, differentiate into particular cell types. And one important pathway is the insulin signaling pathway. And as you know, when we eat, insulin levels rise. It comes from these little beta cells in our pancreas. And I think of insulin as a little signal knocking on cell doors, telling them, hey, there's glucose out here, stick out your receptors and grab it and enjoy. And there's another pathway that was also discovered back in the 90s, a fascinating enzyme in the cell called mTOR. It stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. And the interesting thing about that one, that protein, is that its target molecule, rapamycin, was discovered first. It came from a soil sample taken from Easter Island back in the 80s, I believe, and took 20 years or so to figure out what it was doing, what it was triggering, and it turned out to be an inhibitor of this protein called mTOR. And the more scientists dug into it, the more they came to realize that mTOR is a master regulator of cell growth and cell proliferation. It controls whether the cell, it's kind of at a decision point for the cell as to whether to generate a lot of proteins and cell membrane components to prepare for division or not. And so what we've come to understand the last 20 years or so is that intermittent fasting, fasting long enough to exhaust the stored carbs, the glycogen we have in our livers, which takes somewhere between 12 and 24 hours, depending upon the size of the person, size of their liver and everything. But what it ends up doing is shutting down signaling through the insulin pathway and consequently shutting down mTOR. There's I won't geek out too much more, but another player in this drama is an enzyme called AMPK, and it's kind of an energy sensor for the cell. And when it senses a low energy environment, especially a low carb, a low glucose environment, it shuts down mTOR as well, because there's no reason for the cell to be building up for replication in a time of famine. And so the bottom line is that the combination of these two things, AMPK being activated, mTOR being inhibited, invokes an ancient program that lies within our cells. And I mean program in the sense of, kind of a software algorithm that tells the cell, you need to go into survival mode. Things are bad right now, and we don't know how long they're going to be bad. It could be that, in evolutionary terms, we're in a hostile environment and there's no food around, and we've got to go out and go hunting, or we're likely to starve to death. But it does a wonderful thing in that it kicks in this process that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that hasn't been known for all that long, and resulted in a couple Nobel Prizes just a couple of years ago, called autophagy, or autophagy. But literally it means self-eating. And it's this interesting process where the cell, in an effort to conserve resources, starts breaking down its own old components and recycling them. And this turns out to be a wonderful thing because we're realizing more and more that many of the diseases of aging that I mentioned seemed so separate years ago, now seem to have underlying pathologic mechanisms that involve misfolded proteins. That as we age, proteins start to aggregate, they clump together. You may be familiar with that process, the amyloid proteins in Alzheimer's, or alpha-synuclein in Parkinson's, or many other examples. So this ends up being a really, really good thing for us to kick our bodies periodically into this mode where they just kind of hunker down. They start to go into heavy-duty recycling mode. They get ready for the cells to start to burn fat. And so that means they need to ramp up that whole fat-burning mechanism, deal with the reactive oxygen species that are generated by synthesizing new chaperones and antioxidants. And so it ends up being a wonderful thing for our bodies. There's also speculation that it helps clear out some of the senescent cells that are increasingly recognized as bad actors in a number of diseases. But cells that have stopped proliferating and are spewing out inflammatory byproducts. The bottom line is that intermittent fasting is an alternative, a very happy alternative to long-term caloric restriction, and really helps us maintain our bodies in a much healthier state, and without necessarily doing all the other things we should be doing in terms of dietary changes, but in a combination with those provides a very powerful intervention that's probably as powerful as many pharmaceuticals, and obviously is preferable to those. But Paige, I'll pause there at the risk of boring everybody to death, and let you go on.
Yeah, sounds great. So if you're attending in person, let us know if you have any questions about the science of fasting that we can answer. And then for those, this is also going to be recorded and sent out to people. So if you do have questions when you see this later, you can always send us an email or sign up at Life Apps and find us there to ask questions. Awesome. Yeah. And so some of the users who have joined are really eager to listen to the science of fasting. So they said it's not boring at all.
Good.
Awesome. So we're going to walk through just some ways to use the Life app, especially if you are an influencer or someone who wants to grow a community. So we're going to kind of go through as if we're considering different goals you might have with the Life Fasting Tracker app. So you might want to just learn more about intermittent fasting. A lot of the people that signed up for this webinar and that asked to get a recording did say they wanted to learn more just about how to live healthier with intermittent fasting and to share that information with other people in their circles. And so if you want to learn more, I just encourage you to do your own research. There's so much information out there online. Unfortunately, it's a little bit like, navigating the good and bad information, but there is a lot of good information out there. So it's always important to consider the source of your information. And if you can, I'll talk a little bit about how you can make sure you found a source that you can trust with regards to science information about fasting. And always, if you have questions beyond that, it's a really good idea to consult your physician and to tell others in your circles to do the same thing. While a lot of physicians might not have, like primary care physicians might not know a lot about fasting and nutrition, at least they can tell you if you have any conditions that would contraindicate it or point you in the right direction. You can also learn more about intermittent fasting. We have a series of FAQs that we've consulted experts for that you can find at the lifeapps.io site. And just always take online advice with caution. So there's plenty of people out there that will tell you how you should be fasting, what's the best way to fast. Unfortunately, a lot of it is informed by personal experience for some of these people and not necessarily science. So it's always best to go to the science to figure out what works best for you and what makes you feel good, as opposed to taking other people's advice. So some people to follow, and Don alluded to some of these people, but there's great experts out there on intermittent fasting. A lot of them are actually active on social media too, so you can follow them. Mark Mattson at the NIH has tons of papers. If you search, if you go to Google Scholar or even Google and search for Mark Mattson intermittent fasting, you'll find a lot of really great reviews of intermittent fasting and its impacts on the brain. So he's a great person to follow. Dr. Valter Longo is another one who's spearheaded a lot of research around intermittent fasting, and he's you can follow him on Facebook. Dr. Sachin Panda has a great Instagram account and a Twitter account, and he talks a lot about circadian rhythms in intermittent fasting, or how fasting can impact our daily rhythms of sleep and other processes. Other really good ones are Rhonda Patrick. She has a podcast where she interviews other researchers specifically. And I've listed some others there, including people at the Buck Institute that do a lot of research around intermittent fasting. So these are actual researchers who conduct either clinical trials or animal studies around intermittent fasting. So if they share a paper or a resource, you can at least be sure that they are sharing something that has science behind it. Other ways to find information you can trust is through peer-reviewed research studies. So if you're not familiar with what peer review is, I mean, it's essentially a process that scientists go through to have other scientists who are experts in their field look at their papers and look at their research to determine if it kind of deserves to be out in the public or not. And so you can find peer-reviewed research studies in scientific journals. And for example, easy ways to search those is through PubMed.gov and then also through Google Scholar. So if you go to either one of those places and you search for intermittent fasting, you'll start to pull up scientific journal articles around intermittent fasting. So these they're research studies that other scientists have kind of, checked off on, saying, yes, this is good science. And so you can trust those studies, at least more than you can studies that haven't been peer reviewed. There's also .gov resources like CDC, clinicaltrials.gov. Anything with a .gov behind it or a .edu is something that you can probably trust more than the first site that pops up on Google. And also look for reputable institutions, something like the Mayo Clinic, American Diabetes Association, academic institutions. These are all great places to, if you have questions about fasting or someone has shared a piece of information that you're not sure is true, it's great to go back to these sources to kind of fact check other people. One thing to know is, I don't know if many people here, if you're trying to read studies around intermittent fasting, if you're starting to do research and you're trying to parse these things apart, it can be very difficult to read a scientific research study, but there's little things you can do to help yourself. One is that if you find a peer-reviewed research study, that to look in their methods section, because at least they're going to tell you how they did the study. And so you can look to see, like, did they use mice? Did they use rats? Did they use humans? And that'll tell you, how far along is this research. If it's in mice, you could take some lessons from it, but you can't necessarily apply it as well to humans. But if it was a human study, obviously, there's more there that applies to what we're living in our daily lives. You can look for reviews. So sometimes the paper will be like annual reviews is one source of like reviews of topics, and that's where they're going to have many different studies that they've kind of looked at and are drawing across. And this is it's easier to get a clearer picture of what's actually happening, because individual research studies are kind of like bricks in a wall. They build up to a bigger picture. So looking at reviews of many different studies is going to help you really see where the field is currently. And I was also encourage you to just look at the authors of the paper or the article that you're reading and find the credentials for those authors. Maybe you could find them on LinkedIn. Maybe you could find their academic, EDU profiles, and just see what's their background. Have they published in the area before? Do they have PhDs in, molecular biology, or are they social scientists? What's their background? So that you can start to determine if the source you're looking at is a good source. And then also, it gets a little bit technical, but try to look for whether the study that you're reading was an intervention or whether it was observational. So you might have seen headlines in the news that like say coffee's, good for you. And that they maybe have done something where they looked at people who drank coffee, and then they looked at, okay, are those people generally healthy? So it's a correlation. So it's like, okay, it looks like people who drink coffee are also healthy people, but it doesn't say cause and effect. Versus if there's a study where they did an experiment and gave half the people coffee and half of the people not, and controlled those things, that's called an intervention. And with interventions, you could start to get more at whether there was a cause and effect relationship between the intervention, for example, fasting, and the outcome. Tim pointed out also who funded the study. That's a really good thing to look forward to. So under any research study at the very bottom, they'll have acknowledgments, and they always should include their funders there. It is very good to look at who funded this research study, because if it was funded by a ketone supplement company, you obviously need to be careful in interpreting the results. So that's a really good point. So beyond just, how do you determine if it's a good source? Those were some good ideas of trying to find good sources of information. And then in just being a thought leader in the area of intermittent fasting, it's important to think about doing the right thing and being ethical. So for example, we can help not spread misinformation if we make sure we do our due diligence to read a paper, at least try, to where if we see big problems with it, maybe we don't share it out on our social media. So as much as you can, kind of make yourself your own filter for sharing. It'll help not accidentally spread some very bad piece of information. Obviously, don't give medical advice. And if people have questions, especially about more extreme types of fasting, it's always good to, encourage them to talk to their physician instead of just doing what you did, because you might have very different underlying biology than someone else. And then always share your sources where you got your information from. That can also help other people do the same research you did by saying, hey, don't take my word for it. Like, here's a study that I'm referencing, or here's the information and where I got this information. And that can help people keep us accountable to sharing the things that are correct. Another thing, just kind of in this same vein, is if you do see anything that seems inappropriate in the Life app, we will soon be having an automated process for reporting inappropriate content. But right now, in the settings of the Life app, you can report inappropriate content and send us an email. So if you do see anything that's problematic, if you see a circle that's inappropriate or anything like that, we really want to enlist, have our community help us report those things, because we definitely have a no tolerance policy against people kind of spreading misinformation, that they're trying to mislead other people or to lead them down bad health behaviors. So we do ask you to report any appropriate content that you see. So I'll just stop there real quick and say, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and I can answer them with regards to, finding good information about fasting and learning more. So your next goal might be to share. So maybe you have a circle that you really want to share information with. And so I'll give you some tips on sharing. So for my background, I am a science communication and social media researcher. I've done a lot of research around social media and kind of what gets shared. So I'm bringing you some of that expertise here. But it's the one tip is really kind of sounds straightforward, but it's just really trying to find valuable and helpful content and sharing that with people. So there's a lot of things you could do to sort of make yourself a thought leader or to put yourself in a position where people look to you for information. One way is kind of aggregating and summarizing content, so especially if you have some expertise or if you read a lot of studies around fasting, to start to pull that together, maybe in like a weekly, Instagram post or a feed update in your Life app. But by aggregating and being a source of information for others in a very easy, like one place, you'll be really providing a very valuable resource to someone else so that they can get more information from you. Share your passions and expertise too. So if you do just really passionate about something around fasting or health or a hobby that you have, sharing those things can really make you seem relatable and to help other people to want to follow you in your community. You could do things like telling your own story and showing progress pictures. A lot of people, like Sumaya is someone on Instagram who has done that to an awesome effect of kind of sharing her story and just the progress she made with intermittent fasting. And then a lot of people look to her for advice. You could talk and share insights from, leaders if you do happen to talk to someone like Don and, you get some information from him, kind of turning that back around and telling other people can be a great way to kind of spread information in a way that they find valuable. You can give other people inspiration. So, really cool strategies are things like, inspirational quotes, daily inspiration for other people trying to go through fasting, or maybe this is their, their first time, if the first few weeks of intermittent fasting and going through struggles of getting adjusted. There's a lot of things you can do to give inspiration in ways that have other people really looking to you in your circles for that. One thing you can do, so right now we don't support links in the Life app, but if there are cool articles or studies you want to link to, you can always use short links. I use Bitly. It's a way to create short links where you can customize it. So it can be like bit.ly/ keto natty fasting resource. So you can customize the link and it makes it a lot easier for people. You could put that like in a Life Circle feed update. And that way people might not be able to click on it, but they can easily type it into their browser and go find that resource. So people tend to share. This book is a really awesome book if you are interested in what people share and why. It's a social science study around what's contagious, basically. And the point is that people share things that are useful and educational. So when you're providing value, especially in terms of high information value, that's very, very shareable. People like to share things that are entertaining, funny, emotional. So telling these, kind of revealing something about yourself and your own journey in fasting. People share things that are inspirational, that relate to everyday life. So something that they go through every single day is going to be something that they like to share. People share stories and they share things that are visual. So if you can if everything you share kind of has at least one of these attributes, you're doing a really good job in terms of kind of social media marketing. So this is just from that book. They talk a lot about these kind of different areas of what makes things shareable. It's kind of what I said, social currency, or giving people something to talk about and something to have a discussion around. Triggers or things that have value, application to everyday life, like eating breakfast or, breaking a fast if you're doing a daily fast. Things that are emotional, so our own personal stories, struggles we've gone through, and then things that have practical value, like tips on the 3 different electrolytes you need to be consuming when you're fasting, or something that people can take and share because it's very practical. And then things are stories and things that are visible or that are public. So sharing visuals is always a great way to engage people. So we do have the ability to share pictures in the Life app. So if you go to your feed, there's a little button at the top of the feed that looks like a little pencil, and you can click that and share text as well as upload pictures to the Life app. So you'll find that probably if you share a picture along with an update, it's going to get more likes or more views than if you don't share a picture, just because people are attracted to visuals. So you can always create your own pictures by taking pictures of what you're eating, how you ended your fast, selfies, progress pictures. But you can also create graphics. Canva.com is something very easy for the beginners to create cool little infographics and like inspirational quotes and stuff like that. It's important to not violate copyright. You don't want to get yourself in trouble, especially other social media outlets like Instagram and that kind of thing have kind of tried to prevent this by blocking people from posting things that are copyrighted. But you just want to be, you want to give the original creator of the graphic or image attribution, and you don't want to, take money away from them, basically. So there's a lot of places where you can find images that you can use. Wikimedia or Wikipedia is a great example. So all those images uploaded there are public domain or Creative Commons. You can also share pictures that you find at .gov sites like CDC, and you can also look at Flickr for Creative Commons images. So just be aware when you're sharing images through the Life app, the best practice is to not violate someone else's copyright. And then telling a story. So I really like this book, Wired for Story. If you're really interested in kind of why we need stories in our life, you would love this book. And it basically, like the end message is that it's trying to tell people like what is a story. So we know a story when we hear it, but it's very hard to recapitulate a story necessarily, like what is the essence of it. And essentially the essence of a story is internal change. So it's communicating how you went through something difficult and how you changed as a result. So maybe you had a change of perspective. Maybe, you tried a lot of things and finally came to the thing that worked. Maybe you thought one thing and you had a myth in your head, and when you read some piece of information about fasting, that myth was corrected. Whatever it is, that internal change or that kind of aha moment for yourself, that's the like crux of telling a story. So if you can communicate to people how you went through something difficult and how you changed as a result, those are going to be the most compelling stories that people like to hear and share. So again, this is how you can share in Life. So you can go to your Life feed, the feed tab, and there's a little like pencil box up at the top that allows you to create a post. From there, the default is going to be creating a public post. That means people in all of your different circles can see that post. You can write a little story. It'll tell you like how many characters you have left to write. And you can also add a picture, and you can tag people in that post as well. And so you can send that out. And again, if it's a public post, it'll send to all your circles. There's also a little click down menu from public post, a little arrow that if you click that, you can either do a public post, a circle post, which goes to one or more of your different circles that you're in. And then you can also send a private post, which is basically direct messaging, but it appears in the feed only to that person. So if you click on a circle post, we'll talk about that in a bit, but when you click circle post, you can either do one or more of your different circles to post that picture or feed update in. You can also, if you own the circle that you're posting to, you can make it an announcement. And you might have seen announcements in your app, but they appear in a special little box now that's blue at the top of the feed. So if you see posts there, it's because someone who owns the circle that you're in posted a announcement that appears there. Does anyone have any questions about that before I move on? Just let me know if you want me to clarify anything. Another great way to increase your visibility in the Life app is to add a bio. Again, telling your story. So you can tell your story in your settings in your profile. You have an ability to add a little biography. And doing that not only will tell your story for people that are in your circles, but if you create a public circle that people are browsing through, the thing that determines whether someone's going to join a public circle is one, either their innate interest in the topic of the circle, And then two, who owns the circle, and like how are they going to be getting like an interaction with that person. So if one of you owns a circle and people are coming over from Instagram and they just really want to be in your circle, it's going to help for you to add your bio, because they're going to be able to see who owns the circle and then go to the bio to see more about that person. So that's kind of sharing. Another kind of level up might be you want to engage people who are in your life circle. So you really want to start to not just spread information, but get things back. So to engage, to really get this thing that is kind of people commenting and sharing and people engaging community, it's actually definitely something you have to work at to engage people in a community or a group that you own. And so one way you can do that is by inviting, so asking people specifically to engage and then rewarding them for doing that. So what does that mean? You might ask questions, but then when people respond to a question that maybe you've posted in the Life app through an announcement, if you don't then respond and engage their response to your question, then you've kind of lost them and they might not do it again. So you want to start discussions and then follow up on those so that people see value. And the more you do that, the more people will engage with your content and your like discussion points. So one really great way to do that is to listen. So to listen to other people if they have, questions, to regularly browse your circles. And in the future, we'll have an ability for people to actually use our Precision Health Cloud platform or back into, if they kind of want to be a pro influencer or a health coach or something like that, to better look at all the different engagement they're getting with their Life apps circles. But it's best to try to reply and to try to, listen, to reply to comments and to engage people who are engaging with your content. So you can do things like give encouragement to people who are struggling, to people who post that they're struggling in your circle, or to do different things that kind of follow up and help people on their journey through intermittent fasting. So I recently posted an announcement, and this also was an Instagram post that probably got some of the greatest engagement of most recent of all the recent posts that I've personally done through our Life apps Instagram and through the announcements feature of the Life app. And if you read it, you can kind of see like exactly why it got so much engagement. Essentially because I'm kind of bringing up an issue that, it's difficult sometimes to talk to family members about fasting. And then I'm asking people to share their experiences and their stories around that issue. So especially if it's an issue that resonates with people and you're asking them to share their stories, people love to talk about their own experiences and themselves. So it's a great way to start getting a lot of engagement. And then, following up on those things is going to be a really good idea. So a post like this can get you a lot more than if you just, share something without asking for feedback or without starting a discussion. So one way you can make sure you follow up on any comments in your circles is through this like filtering. So if you go to your go to your feed, and I apologize because I have tons of circles that I'm in, but you can sort, and one of the second one is called My Activity. So this is, if you go to your feed and you're actually sorting the top of it, right now it says all by default, and you click that and you can sort. If you click by My Activity, it'll show you all of the posts that either you've done, that you've commented on, announcements that you've made, or posts that you've liked. So if you've done any engagement with a previous post in your feed, or if you've done an announcement or something like that, you can regularly check on if you've gotten any comments by filtering by My Activity. And that can allow you to do these replies and commenting right now that it might be otherwise hard to follow up on. Another way is just to, with content, engaging your circles with content. So I know people who joined this webinar said they were interested in how to do challenges. Challenges are a great way to start creating community engagement. So you could, it could just be something like, hey, in this circle, making in your little circle description saying like, in this circle, we have a challenge of fasting every Friday for so many hours, and like, sharing our experiences, or to come up with new challenges for people on a weekly or monthly or regular basis is a great way to kind of engage people back on a regular basis in creating content and sharing their stories with you. So actively asking people to tell their stories, and then including very specific calls to action in your posts is going to be a great way too to get engagement. So if people don't know what you're asking them to do, they might not respond. But if you ask people like, hey, in response to this, like share a picture of how you broke your fast today, a very specific call to action will be a lot better to get the outcome that you're looking for. And then, just focus on sharing often and at different times. So a lot of times, people aren't going to be in the Life app all the time. So sharing on a regularly, even maybe once in the morning, once in the afternoon, in the evening. It's the same principle with Twitter and all these other social media outlets. The idea is not everyone's on there all the time, so you can share at different times and in different ways, even if it's the same message. And then you have to just give, to receive. So you have to give encouragement, give feedback, and post and participate in other people's circles in order to get the same for your own circles. So I recently saw that even this is a pretty small circle with someone who is owning the circle, and it's around like plant-based eating and intermittent fasting. But I've been noticing that she does a great job of posting a new announcement every day that is kind of a question or a challenge to her circle members, and she's getting, even with a pretty small circle, she's getting some pretty good engagement from the people in it, just because she's kind of regularly doing these updates and asking people for feedback. So again, just how to post an announcement, you have to go to your circle post and you click a circle that you own. And then from there, you can click on the little, there's a little checkbox to make it an announcement. So you won't see that if the circle isn't your own circle. So if you put a bunch of circles in there that you want to post to and only one of them is yours, it's not going to show up. It has to be just your circle, and then you can make your post an announcement. And finally, the next step is creating community. So how do you, start to really expand your reach as a life influencer? And that's one way to do that, is to create circles around common interests or health goals or health struggles that people are going through, and then to create a descriptive description for that circle that tells people why they should join and what they can expect from the circle. So maybe like, who are you? What is this circle about? What are you going to be? What are the people in the circle? What can they expect from the people that are fasting there? What should they be sharing? What kind of expectations do you have from them? How can they invite their friends? So the more descriptive you make that group, the same as for a Facebook group or something like that, the more people are going to be, they know whether they want to join it or not. And to keep your circle very updated with content and with announcements is another great way to make sure that you grow a community that's active. So if you haven't created a circle before, you can go to your and home. There's a little button where all your little circles are on the front page of the Life app. And if you click there, you can find the circles. You can explore different circles, and you can also create your own. So by default, it's a public circle, meaning anyone can join. And you can add a circle name and a circle description. So you can see, if you might browse through to find the National Fasting February circle, and you can see that I included there what this circle is about, what fasting schedules people are typically observing, and then I even have a link to tell people you can invite your friends to this circle through this link. So you want to ask people to engage and give them specific ideas of how to do so. So, when you join this circle, tell us how you got into fasting and, share a picture. And so having weekly or monthly kind of sharing items or things where you ask people what to share would be a really good way to create that community. Also highlighting the community members. So picking every month, someone to highlight in an announcement or something like that, or call out someone for doing a great job or making progress, is also a great way, because people start to see that by engaging in the community, they get rewarded in terms of these features. You could also ask friends, maybe it's too much for you to manage this community on your own. You could ask other people to help you in giving feedback or giving encouragement to your circle members who are struggling, for example. So you can engage as a group or a community in kind of managing a circle. You can also engage experts, for example, calling people to do little Q&As I could even see, you could even host a live chat through like a commenting feature on a live, one of the announcements in life. And ask people to ask questions in real time of an expert or something like that. So there's plenty you can do to engage people, but the more valuable and practical and educational that content is, the more they're going to want to engage. And then just the final tips are to share your circle links in your other social media accounts. So make sure that the link to your circle or to download the app and then to your circle, make sure that's prominent on all of the different communications you put out on social media. It can increase the people that follow you elsewhere can follow you in the Life app. You can share your screenshots and tag us at LifeHomicIF on Instagram or Facebook, and we will also help promote your circles and your content. And then if you're really interested, you can apply to our ambassador program. So we basically have a program for people that we believe are truly spreading the good word about intermittent fasting and the science of fasting and health. And they can become an ambassador and get rewarded for how many downloads they get from other people and like how much engagement they get in their circles. So that concludes this webinar. We'd love for you to ask us questions. If you're listening to a recording, you can, find anywhere you can find us on social media or through the lifeapps.io site. You can contact us to ask questions or to give us feedback. For example, if there's a really cool feature you're wanting from the Life app and you want to talk to us more about that, you can do that. So if you have any questions here from the attendees that are here, thank you so much for joining. And we will again send this out as a recording to the people who signed up for the webinar. A lot of people signed up who weren't attending in person. So hopefully the recording will be useful. Yeah, so thank you all for your comments. And we're going to shut it down unless we have any other lingering comments from people. And again, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, we can give you a link. Yeah, so if you signed up, we'll send you a recording. They'll probably put it on YouTube, so you will be able to share with others. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paige. Bye, everybody.